How does the influx of streaming apps affect artist and composer rights? What are NFTs and what can they do for your music career? All this and more in this episode of the New Music Industry Podcast.
You're listening to the New Music Industry with David Andrew Weeb.
Today I'm chatting with entertainment lawyer, music whiz, and artist advocate, Stephen Gagliano. How are you today, Stephen?
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So we're going to be touching on a couple of subjects that are top of mind for musicians these days. And I'm sure it's something I'm going to start getting a lot of questions about as well. But first, it sounds like you're involved in music in a variety of capacities. So I would love to hear how it is that your passion for music developed.
Yeah. As a kid, I was in, my high school band. And I, at that point, was drumming. I had all of these great aspirations to become a rock star. But then lo and behold, I realized pretty early on that was not going to happen. So I decided to be tangentially involved in music through the business side. And kind of right after high school and college, I tried to set myself up so that my trajectory would be that way. So I was a music industry major with a political science major as well, so that I would have the pre-law experience. So that I could go to law school, get that experience, and then become an entertainment lawyer. I kind of knew pretty early on that I wanted to be on the business side of music. So that was the path I saw, and I took it.
Well, that's quite relatable. And I do think there are a lot of artists and bands that sort of come to that point of going, I'm not sure we're going to make it. But what was it for you? What was that moment when you realized that was the case?
I had a music industry class my first year of college. And as a drummer, I'm listening to all of these breakdowns of copyright. At that point, I didn't even know there were two sides to a copyright. And it suddenly dawned on me that drummers don't really get writer share in publishing. Generally, that's not the case unless they're a part of the band, in which case they're just splitting it. And it started to really dawn on me that one, the avenues for actually collecting money as a drummer seem to be less. And then two, I was just bad at drumming. So that's kind of the overarching issue there.
And then that transition from being an artist to going into the music business, I don't think that's a transition that people take lightly, but was that something that happened fairly organically for you?
I mean, much the same way I assume a lot of artists realize their passion early. There are things that spark your interest and you find yourself kind of diving down rabbit holes for. And I've felt this in some ways in music, when you're like digging through someone's back catalog and you realize like, oh, I really care about music, or I really care about this specific genre. I was noticing similar things on the business side. I was reading a lot of books about, artist management or U.S. copyright law, even as a young guy. And I just tried to, notice that, and notice where my interests were lying and where I was spending my time. And it was like, well, if I care about this and I'm doing this on my own free time, I might as well try to make a career out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have those things that we would potentially do without any payment just because of the fulfillment and sense of reward that we get from it. Now, I wanted to ask, Spotify and Apple Music are among the top music streaming apps right now, and a lot of artists are trying to claw their way into playlists and grow their following. It doesn't appear as though this trend is going anywhere soon. So how does the influx of streaming apps affect artists and composer rights?
Well, first off, let me just say, I'm talking here solely on behalf of myself, not on behalf of my companies. With that legal qualifier out of the way. Streaming, generally, I think has been a great boon to the industry. At least since Napster, we've seemed to, particularly in the last few years, really relied on streaming for income sources. That said, there's definitely work to be done in terms of, getting writers their fair share. but I think, in general, the streaming apps are helpful in aggregate. I think, if you're relying just on one, it's probably not enough. And again, there are thresholds that a commercial artist needs to reach to even make that living wage. But I would say, in general, I'd rather have the streaming applications than not, if that's even a dichotomy we wanted to discuss. It is very much an artist specific issue. Not an issue, but it's specific to each artist and the way they want to exploit their own creative output. I view streaming apps as a part of the whole, not necessarily the one thing you can rely on.
I've talked to some artists who seem kind of reluctant to put their music out there, if only just because they're worried about their ideas being copied. And the thing that I often say, though, is that, like, maybe if you wait 2 years, your unique idea or the thing that you think is so unique might not even be that unique anymore. And by that point, someone else has already come up with that same idea.
I mean, it's very possible. Think of the amount of musicians, even just amateur musicians, who are recording stuff and immediately posting it to the web. And something like a TikTok, where we really are getting almost instantaneous musical output. Just from a copyright perspective, if you put that in tangible form, boom, you're the creator. So in some ways, it is important to, not immediately, but as soon as practicable, release your music. I think it's no longer a question of whether you should be releasing on these streaming platforms. It's just how fast can you do it with still releasing a high quality product?
Yeah, I think you really kind of nailed it on the head there. So about a month ago, I was watching one of my favorite marketers' live streams, and he was talking about NFTs, or non-fungible tokens. My initial reaction was basically, it sort of seems like this is kind of like eBay, except for digital content. But NFTs are kind of a big deal right now, and they have a growing presence in the music industry. So that seems as good a place to start as any. What are NFTs?
Well, I'll start with this. It's difficult for me, and I would expect almost any attorney, to speak on this with authority because they are so new and the technology is constantly evolving. But effectively what it is, a non-fungible token is a unique, and that's an important word, product that has its own identification tied to the blockchain. So any blockchain really that has a quote unquote smart contract functionality, which basically just means you can set how the asset is transferred or recorded. Any blockchain technology can set this up. And then the token itself, it's interesting. I'm seeing, at least, and I'm just going to speak specifically with music content, I'm seeing this being presented in 2 ways. One is the token is a collectible. So effectively a limited edition vinyl that you're buying, but it's only in the digital space. So you pay that money, the blockchain records that you are the quote unquote owner. So again, it's good for transparency purposes to see who the actual owner is. And if they resell it, the purchaser will now be listed as the owner. So that's one side. It's a collectible, almost like buying and selling, pins or whatever. But then the other side, there's some people who are starting to use these to potentially sell copyright, which I think is, a much more complex issue, and it really opens kind of the floodgates I see to copyright issues, both in terms of if someone's purchasing the NFT and thinking they have copyright ownership, or if they do have copyright ownership, what sort of rights are they allowed to grant to later on purchasers? Are they allowed to grant, let's say a synchronization license on behalf of the original author? It really just opens up the floodgates to a bunch of questions, specifically on those tokens where copyright ownership is being sold. I think right now it seems like most of the tokens that are being sold are effectively digital collectibles, and that does make sense in a way. It's a great way for an artist to market themselves directly, potentially get money directly, because the money will flow directly to the initial creator if they've built that into the smart contract. But it is definitely a really young nascent field that we're just not sure how it will pan out. I don't know, how involved performing rights organizations are, any, collective management organizations are, how involved they are with, potentially interjecting in future sales. The rights are all still up in the air in many ways. So we're going to see. But it is exciting, and it does seem like it could be a potential, new growth area. So everyone's waiting with bated breath to see how some early entrants are proceeding. But a lot of it is just we're going to have to wait and see and work out the kinks as we're going. And that's kind of how we've been treating it on our end.
Yeah, I do know that copyright has had to play catch up in a lot of ways, especially with the emergence of Napster and other streaming platforms and digital downloads and things like that. So it would be amazing to navigate this new field of NFTs with more ease and readiness and preparedness.
We'll see. It is, I think Napster is a great point. I personally noticed that it does feel like because of Napster and the relative lateness to the game and handling that medium shift, I feel like a lot of people are trying to jump on this early to make sure those same failures don't happen again, because the music industry is kind of notorious for being very late to the Napster game and handling those rights. So I think it's been a positive sign for me to see a lot of people talking about this to be what seems to be early on in the process. And hopefully, those same failings in the past won't occur here, because everyone does seem to be on top of it and discussing it like we're doing here.
I mentioned that I'm on a certain marketer's live streams, usually on a weekly basis. But anyway, one week he was giving away NFTs, and I ended up winning an NBA Top Shot NFT while on the show. And then I tried to flip it right away, but no action was happening, despite the fact that I'd heard some people were making six-figure deals on the platform.
I think the Top Shot example is a good one in terms of how it can immediately be accessible to most people. Like, I think thinking of it as like a trading card makes perfect sense from a collectible standpoint. And it doesn't involve, those complex copyright laws and, all of the different revenue sources. It's simply just like buying and selling a collectible. So I think we're going to see a lot of that in the short term, and we'll see how it pans out in the long term.
What does the rise of NFTs and music distribution platforms mean for artists with regards to compensation they receive?
Distribution platforms, I'm going to just treat separately. I think it's a great question. We should talk about both of them. NFTs,
yeah.
Specifically from what I'm seeing right now, it does, particularly for an independent artist, seem like a great way to collect money directly and immediately. You get paid, as soon as that initial sale happens, and then depending on what smart contract you use, you could potentially just automatically embed in the smart contract additional payments to yourself every time there's a resale. So let's say every resale happening thereafter gives you 10, 20%. It's a great way to collect that money directly. And it does raise some other issues, which is, like how are your co-writers and, mixers and engineers on your tracks being compensated? It's probably going to be directly through you. So the money comes to you, you pay out to them. But I think it's just a new opportunity and a new avenue to collect income. On distribution platform side, if we're talking, something like The Orchard or TuneCore, it's kind of a common refrain now, but the amount of different distribution platforms has never been, larger, and I think it's only positive for an artist. You have all of these different opportunities. You can forum shop effectively between different platforms and try to find something that really suits your needs. And, most of them do a pretty good job. They have good connections with all of the different digital service providers. They give you pretty good rates on the back end, particularly as an independent artist. Yes, oftentimes they're not doing the marketing for you. But as a younger artist, as, just your kind of standard, let's say, studio musician, it's a great way to be able to collect all that money on your own and with economies of scale. I don't expect someone who's a session musician to be reaching out to every different DSP in like Germany or something. It just makes way more sense to have one institution doing it for you that is good at it. So I am very happy with what I've seen over the past 10 years in the rise of distribution platforms for independent artists. There's still definitely a huge gain to be had by going to a major or going to, a traditional label or publisher, because they have, further connections. They have all of the marketing skills and, the acumen there. But as, a new artist who's trying to make it, it's a great way to get your music out there.
Yeah, I like what you said about music distribution. I think, there used to be some horror stories about royalty collection takes so long, or I rarely get paid, or I don't get paid on time, or I'm not getting paid what I owed. And I think there's just fewer and fewer of those kinds of stories, whether you take with, CD Baby or TuneCore, or now Just Your Kids risen to popularity because of their unlimited uploads for one yearly fee, or even Ditto Music now, which offers something very similar. You can get a fairly comparable service, and depending on the service you choose, you can get extended distribution. It's always pros and cons, though. Some of them do a little bit more for you, and some of them do a little bit less.
I think it's very much, you just got to figure out what works for you, and see what you like the best. I will say there's definitely a move towards transparency in all of these platforms. I think it's generally industry wide. So, those horror stories about, over years, no one was telling me anything are few and far between.
Yeah, no, that's definitely good news. I even, at one point, and this opportunity is probably still there, to do like boutique music distribution for independent musicians, simply because there are lots of places your music distributor doesn't get your music out to. But I think, you'd still have to weigh the value of it and the cost of it, and what sort of destinations, the music would be sent to, and whether it would benefit the artist. So, but it is
definitely important in terms of destinations to look at where and what partners they already have, all these distributors, to see what countries they're distributing in. That's always an important part, which most people don't really take a second to look at.
Yeah.
Want to make sure they're reaching all those major territories. Yes, there are some territories that will matter less, but I think you could probably guess all of the music territories right offhand, and most people wouldn't be surprised to see what's big. US, UK, Germany, Japan, South Korea. You're getting to these major territories, and as long as your distributor can reach out there, then you're in a great place. And again, 10, 20 years ago, that just wasn't available. You could not immediately, with a click of a button, upload your whole album and then immediately have access in a foreign territory. So it's incredible when I think about it.
It is. That's a very good point, actually. And kind of going back to what was said about NFTs, I think, we kind of painted the picture that this could be a nice side income for musicians. In fact, in some cases, it could end up being pretty lucrative. I guess my concern is like, I've had people ask me about it, and then I go, well, do you have an online following? And they'll go, not really. And so for artists like that, I'm guessing that turning NFT into a lucrative enterprise could be a ways out, just because they actually need a way to draw attention to their content.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. There's also what are called gas fees, effectively transaction fees, that can be prohibitive in some instances. If you have to pay $400 to put your token up on a platform in the first place, that can add up very quickly. So there's definitely a threshold that one needs to meet, and I would guess that threshold is not only financial, but as you alluded to, also in terms of fan base. You need a certain amount of followers to make the minting, the first sale, actually effective.
Yeah,
there's also something to be said
exactly.
about once the coin is up or the token is up, are we going to see a drop in the price of these tokens? I mean, a lot of the news that was made about all of this was because you were seeing 7-8 figure sales of tokens for,
that's right,
Kings of Leon or something. It'll be interesting to see what happens once the hype kind of wears down and see where that market reaches in sort of a stasis level. We're waiting and seeing on all of this.
Yeah, my thinking is along the same lines, though. So this is kind of a curiosity question. As an entertainment lawyer, what are some of the top issues artists come to you with?
So I started my career at a boutique law firm representing artists,
right?
And I have now moved in-house. So I'm no longer representing artists directly. We work with artists. So a little bit different. But I'm trying to think, like, it is really just a kind of an understanding of how all of the money flows together. It's oftentimes difficult for an artist, and really anyone, to conceptualize how many truly different revenue streams need to be monetized in order to make a successful career. Because we're now in the streaming business where we're talking, fractions of pennies in earnings per play, you do need to have this overall aggregate idea of how monies are earned. And it's often difficult just to conceptualize. So a lot of my job is making sure that, our company now and other times artists know all of the different performing rights organizations they need to be applying for, and with all of the different collective management, neighboring rights organizations. They need to make sure, again, their distribution is worldwide. They need to thoroughly understand both the publishing aspect of their career and the label side, the master, sound recording, exploitation.
Yeah.
And when you really break it down, like in each one of these, just on publishing, half of the business, like, there are different revenue streams. You got mechanicals, you've got sync, you have performing income. And in each one of those individual streams, you have, smaller segments, whether it be by territory or by usage type. So at a high level, you kind of understand it's masters and publishing. But then when you really dive down into details, the tree, so to speak, becomes extensive. And it's just conceptualizing again and understanding where all those rights are and who needs to register. In many ways, I'm just like an auditor. I'm just making sure that, like, you've got everything covered.
Yeah, I bet artists appreciate that, though. And that's the kind of stuff that I would not call myself an expert in, but stuff that I still have to know when artists come to me going, what about this? What about that? What about internet radio? And I'm like, okay, so you got to go to Sound Exchange. Are you signed up with the PRO yet? You're going to have to go sign up with the PRO. Do you have someone collecting your music publishing royalties? No, not yet. Okay, well, see if your music distribution company does it. And if not, go and check out this one, right? It just goes on and on. Same with music licensing and placements. That's going to be probably a relationship with another 2 or 3 companies. So
it's all interrelated too. You have to know what copyrights are available, what's exclusive, what's not exclusive. So, in many ways, I do suggest anyone who's reached a level where they can afford to buy and pay for professional help to either hire an attorney or hire an experienced consultant, manager, just someone who can guide them along the way. Because frankly, international copyright law is so complex and confusing that I personally don't want the artists that I love spending their time doing this.
Yeah.
I think they should have an understanding of what's going on, but if this is my whole career, just trying to figure this stuff out, I can't imagine what it'd be like to be a performing musician and try to learn all of this stuff. There's just not enough time. So in many ways, I and all of the business community are here, like yourself, to help artists with their career so they can focus on what we all know and love, music.
Exactly. And a music career is definitely built on a few pillars. You got to have the skill, talent, performance, experience, all that rolled into one. You got to figure out digital marketing some way or another, even if you get help. But it can be fun to do it yourself, at least some of it. And then you got to continue to expand out. You got to know I think what you talked about is basically a pillar all its own, is what are the revenue streams, monetization, copyright, all that kind of stuff. And then networking and connections. Without that, I just see so many artists stumble, and I do internalize, or I do understand just how hard it can be to reach out and say hi and shake hands and stuff like that. But for me, that was the biggest difference. Like, I got to the point as a solo artist where I didn't book any of my own gigs. I just got referrals from other band leaders, and that worked out great. Those were some of the best gigs came from. So
from the connections, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Completely agree. I mean, it is very much a relationship business. I think that's just a part of music in general.
Yeah.
People, it's a communal experience, and that doesn't only relate to listening and playing music. It's also, everyone working in the industry as well.
Absolutely. So I think I need to circle back to the issue of copyright. That is something our artists do ask a lot about. So I think if you can just cover a broad overview of what matters to the artist, we don't have to go super deep into it, but.
Sure. Well, at the highest level, all music has effectively 2 copyrights embedded therein. One is the sound recording, and that is the individual recording at that one point in time. It's what you hear when you click a track on Spotify, when you drop a needle on a vinyl. That's the sound recording. That is also what record labels exploit. And when I say exploit, I don't mean, in some negative sense. I mean, that's what we collect money from.
Yeah.
On the publishing side, there is the musical work copyright. So that is what can be written down and transcribed. Is effectively what can be put on sheet music. So that is more of the theoretical intellectual property, and publishers generally collect on that side. So the business really did separate into 2 specific branches, collecting on both of these 2 separate copyrights. Now in the US, their section 106 of the Copyright Act has a bunch of different 6 different exclusive rights that an artist has, and those rights can be exploited on both sides, both master and publishing. I'm pulling this up right now. Copyright. Hold on, just so I can read them directly here. if you're ever interested in a fun read, and by fun, I mean really, really dull, I'll direct you to Title 17 of the U.S. Copyright Act. It is a page turner for sure.
Yeah.
But the exclusive works for an author in copyrighted works in the U.S. are the right to reproduce, the right to prepare derivatives, the right to distribute by sale to the public. In the case of literary, which is in this case, it would be your musical work, the publishing side, the right to display publicly. Sound recordings also, this is specific to sound exchange. You have the right to display publicly by digital audio transmissions. So interestingly, in the US, we don't really collect what are called neighboring rights on the masters other than in the online format. Like you're not getting these public performance rights from radio, so to speak. Whereas a lot of the rest of the world, sorry, you're seeing my background. A lot of the rest of the world will collect public performance rights just like they would for the musical composition. I'm kind of going all over the place here. There are pretty complex sub copyrights, rights within the copyright law that do get very issue specific. So when you're dealing with these, it's often a good idea to have counsel, to have at least like, a record label or a representative who has experience with these, because they are complex just within the US. And then once you get into international copyright law, you really do need foreign representatives to know that local territories' rights. Yeah. Anything specific that you think artists may have questions about?
I think just the most common question is, how do I copyright my songs, which is pretty basic. And then how do I ensure that, I can maintain those rights and people don't just copy my music? Fair. That's definitely a concern. So there's the creation of the copyright, the registration, and then there's the maintenance. For the actual creation, anytime you put something in what is called fixed and tangible form, you have a copyright. Fixed and tangible being not necessarily like, you've etched it into a vinyl, but anytime you've recorded, even digitally, you have that copyright. Now, in the US, in order to sue for protection of your rights, you do need to register it. And that was fairly recent Supreme Court opinion. Makes sense.
And a registration is, it does cost money. I mean, it's like, I think it's $50 to $100 for standard registration with the U.S. Copyright Office. But it's a pretty straightforward process. And thankfully, if you go online, it does lay out a lot of the process, and they're pretty good at explaining it. There are also things called circulars that are distributed by Copyright Office that give you kind of like a non-legal breakdown of how to do different things within copyright, how to just copyright a sound recording, how to copyright a musical work, and it'll actually break it down for you to make it easier. In terms of maintenance, there's not much you have to do to maintain a copyright once you own it. It's not like a trademark where you need to go out and continue to exploit and stop other people from using your trademark, which is really nice, at least on the copyright side. Once it's registered, it's registered. Yes, someone can refute that registration, but having the copyright registration in hand gives you what's called a rebuttable presumption. So it's effectively up to that refuting party to prove you wrong rather than you going the other way. yeah, maintenance is not too much of a problem with copyright, but as soon as you get that initial registration, you're in a good place. It's a bar that most people don't ever reach. So, power to all those artists who are actually doing the registration process themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's perfect. And I think it puts a lot of minds at ease as well. I'll probably just ask a few quick, fun questions, and then we'll pretty much wrap up this interview. The first one is, what is the last YouTube video you watched?
I actually, every once in a while, we have copyright infringement claims come in. So I was on a big YouTube kick last night going through a bunch of infringing uses. I won't say what those are, but I do happen to find myself often on YouTube seeing if one of our works was infringed or if it's, just an improper claim.
Yeah.
That's a legal response there.
Absolutely. Well, just like me, I'm going down the paid newsletter track right now, and I'm looking to get that set up. But I'm just watching and trying to figure out what I'm going to do with it and the cadence of it and how I'm going to promote it and all that kind of stuff. So same, I end up watching a lot of business stuff.
Yeah.
And then, what is your daily routine like?
Daily routine. Try to wake up early because we do a lot of work in the UK as well. And I'm here in California, so I have to wake up earlier to reach them. But just 2 espressos maybe just to wake me up. I try to exercise, and then it's write the emails and getting through the work of the last day. It is a lot of work. It's something I enjoy, so it's not too, tiring, but I think I found it's important for me to keep exercising just to keep my mental acuity up. The exercise seems to help. That's something I've found out relatively recently, unfortunately, too late in life.
Yeah, I know. I hear you though. Meditation and exercise and actually getting outside into the sun, all that has proven quite crucial. It's like some days I'm like, oh no, I know I overdid it. I had too much caffeine and I feel terrible. And so it's like, okay, tomorrow, not only am I going to make sure I get good enough sleep, I'm also going to make sure that staying off the caffeine, getting some exercise, meditating, doing all the right things. So
do the meditation. Yeah. I think altogether it's helpful.
Yeah.
I will say it's been surprisingly difficult to get out during the pandemic, even with sun outside. You got to make a conscious effort.
I agree. It still requires a conscious effort. And some days you just don't feel like it. Or it's like, it feels like an indulgence to take an entire hour out for yourself or whatever it ends up being. Yeah. Totally get it.
Definitely feel that.
And then I'm sure you'd have a few, but what books have helped you on your journey? Oh,
I've got a huge list. Probably a couple of them are behind me right now.
Yeah.
The Bible, the music industry Bible here in the States is, let's see if I have it. All You Need to Know About the Music Business by Don Passman.
Of course. Yeah.
That's always number one. And even as a lawyer, I refer to that fairly frequently. If you want to go a little more in depth, there's Music, Money, and Success by the Brabeck brothers. That is sort of like Passman's book, but just, more thorough in its details. It's also probably twice the size.
Wow.
Let's see what else. I recently, and this is legal specific, but there's Nimmer on Copyright Law, which is a treatise of copyright law. I mean, it's probably like thousands of dollars to actually own. I have a license subscription to it. But it is the most thorough writing on copyright law anywhere. So I do find myself turning to that a lot, particularly for, those fine nuances that you only come in front of me, once in a couple of years. But All You Need to Know About Music Business is required reading, as far as I'm concerned, for anyone in the business, not just lawyers, but literally anyone, musicians, songwriters.
Yeah, and it's actually a good read too. I felt
It's fun.
As I was beginning the process of reading that book, it just struck me that, wow, this contains something that my books sometimes do not, which is personality. I just thought to myself, wow.
So, but I can't pull it off in writing, so
yeah,
I get it.
And I have 5 books at this point. So, I've kept improving as a writer. I would say even in this last year, I've made leaps and strides in that regard. But it's so cool to kind of tap into those other resources and go, oh yeah, this would keep the reader's attention a little more. So,
what have you enjoyed most about, or like in your books? Which one have you enjoyed most? What topic has been the most rewarding?
The ones that I've written,
yeah.
They're all definitely connected to artistic success. I think I'm still very proud of my first book, The New Music Industry, which ended up being 66,000 words. So definitely a book, a real real length book, and it took two to 2.5 years, and it wasn't always easy to write. I just kind of had to keep going with it until I kind of came up with the idea of, oh, okay, so each chapter is going to be 5,000 words. So then looking at the chapters that don't have that amount, and I keep pounding away at it until it was done. And so many things that I predicted in that book, be it, streaming or like so-called novelty acts like Lindsey Sterling and Macklemore and Pomplamoose, that I pointed out to people, these guys are going to be big. Guess what happened? They are,
Profit.
Yeah. So I don't know if I'm a futurist or not. I'm just saying a lot of things that I pointed out in that book ended up coming true. And then my most recently completed work was the Music Entrepreneur Code. And I'm definitely proud of that one too. It was designed to be a very straightforward, to the point how-to guide on setting up these are the critical elements, these are the critical steps, and just no fluff, no BS. That's how it was intended. And I think through much editing, I was able to achieve that end.
I mean, it's important to get to the point with a lot of this.
Yeah.
It's already so difficult to get through. I know myself, I'm always looking for those, right to the point descriptors. So
yeah.
Thank you for helping the industry.
Oh, absolutely. It's a service, and it's a privilege, and it's an honor for sure.
Yeah.
So, thanks for your time and generosity, Stephen. Is there anything else I should have asked?
No, I think this was a great conversation. I appreciate you having me on.
It was. Yeah. Thanks for being on the show. So if you enjoyed this episode of the podcast and you're looking for direction in your music career, I want you to head on over to musicentrepreneurhq.com/special. Lately, I've been helping musicians with everything from technical issues concerning live streaming to getting focused on the right thing in their music careers. If you're looking for personalized coaching, head on over to musicentrepreneurhq.com/special now. This has been episode 237 of the New Music Industry Podcast. I'm David Andrew Wheat, and I look forward to seeing you on the stages of the world. Thank you for listening. Music in this episode was brought to you by Brian Young. Wherever you're listening to this right now, please consider leaving a 5-star review and comment to help us get the word out about the podcast.